sunlight poured through the slits of the curtains draped in front of the window, the streams of light illuminating the face of the occupant of the wagon. There was a shifting beneath the thin blanket, a mumble about such a rude awakening, before the young woman sat up and rubbed her eyes. Her dark purple hair tumbled in messy waves around her shoulders, a few strands tangled around the horns that curved over her skull. Pale red, pointed ears peeked out from beneath the violet locks, and her clawed hands slid down her face, gently tugging at her cheeks before falling limply to her lap. When she finally opened her eyes, she glared at the window with two pupilless discs of silver set in black sclera. "I don't know which I prefer, blinded first thing in the morning or being struck by that nightmare," she grumbled, running her tongue over her teeth, avoiding the tips of her fangs. It hadn't been the first time she'd had such a dream. The forest stood in fiery ruins, creatures fleeing wherever they could, the rivers turning to acidic sludge. She stood, letting the thin blanket slip to the floor as she placed her hands on the small of her back and leaned from side to side, forward and back. The stretch of her torso was blissful, and her tail curled as she gave one last, final stretch. Turning to the small table beside her, she dressed in relative silence, listening as the others of her clan began to stir and set up camp for morning duties. That was when there was a knock on the door of her wagon. "Wixenia, you're up for gathering—" "Yes, I know." The tiefling moved to the door, strapping her warhammer and dagger up to the belt around her hips as she nudged the door open. "You told me that last night, Len." The human man lifted the corner of his lip with a subtle sneer. "Just making sure you didn't forget." Wixenia rolled her eyes, biting her tongue. She hadn't forgotten a single time when she'd been assigned for a job for the day since she'd been taken into the clan nearly 10 years ago. While the half-elf Yindris had taken his time to reassure her and help her come out of the frightened shell she'd built around herself, Veneman was a typical dwarf and had instilled in her a sense of duty. I can read, you guys. If she was assigned to guard the gatherers, she did just that, her sharp eyes and sensitive ears constantly alert to the forest around them. This had earned her a reputation of being distant and stoic. In truth, she merely kept to herself out of respect for the comfort of those who, even still, found her unsettling. The elves, however few there were, paid her little mind, but there was a mutual enough respect between her and their ilk. The dwarfs couldn't have cared less about what she was so long as she did her job well. The humans and demi-humans, however, were another story. Yindris seemed the most open-minded, though Wixenia suspected that was due to whatever life he had led before finding the clan. One didn't simply learn how to play the harp that beautifully and be able to teach the skill unless one had formal training, or so she had been told. Yindris kept quiet about his past, and Wixenia found kinship with him in this, as she remembered next to nothing of her own. Live in the moment and enjoy the time you're in now rather than worry of what was. Tilting her head from side to side, she was rewarded with a satisfying crack and took a deep breath. Her eyes swept over the campsite with its myriad wagons that was their caravan, and a slight smile pulled at her own lips. As much as she might have been the outcast of the clan, they were still her family, and she was proud to do her part to ensure her family thrived. She picked up the large woven basket that sat beside her wagon and made her way from the clearing, stepping over fallen logs and low-lying brush to delve into the surrounding forest. This was something she truly enjoyed, if she was honest. When she was assigned to gather, she required no supervision. She was a force unto herself, and was more than capable of ensuring her own safety. She chuckled at an old memory, as it swam in front of her mind's eye. A brief fight between herself and a few of the human boys. They had gotten a few lucky shots in before she twisted the arm of one and made him scream. That had gotten Veneman's attention, and it had been the start of her martial training under his guidance. Bruised and sporting a bloody lip, Veneman had simply chuckled when she whirled around to him and snarled. "Time to channel all that fury and might into something useful," he had said. It was due to his tutelage that she was the strong, confident woman that now trekked through the unfamiliar thicket of forest. The tiefling had never been this way, and judging from how little foliage seemed to be disturbed, not a whole lot else had been through either. There were few broken twigs, torn leaves as she moved forward, taking care to disrupt as little as she could manage. In the distance, she spotted something she recognized, a berry bush, and it was ripe for the picking. She took less caution as she made her way to the bush, inspecting the fruit before she touched it. Glancing about, she knelt and plucked one berry, gently applying pressure with her fingers and noting its softness before she popped it into her mouth. Wixenia. In one smooth movement, she had dropped the basket and drawn her dagger, spinning on the balls of her feet to face whoever had whispered her name. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice even and strong. Wixenia. Her eyes widened, scanned the area around her as she rose slowly. Her tail was still, hanging in a stiff curve behind her as she moved around the bush, the basket abandoned. Rather than move toward camp, her feet pulled her further away. Something was calling to her, and it was close. A wall of green met her eyes as she moved past a line of trees that had grown close together. Vines twisted over each other, a mix of woody branches and winding ivy. Wixenia regarded it with suspicion, even as she moved closer. Whoever you are, I've heard you. What do you want? Do not be afraid. I do not fear something I cannot see, she spat with a sneer. What do you want? The vines and brambles parted slowly with soft snapping and crackling, the movements smooth and gentle. Wixenia's hand reached for the warhammer, sliding it out of its loop on her belt as the foliage revealed an opening in a stone wall. Enter. Just as the word had entered her mind, a wave of calm washed over the tiefling. Her heart calmed and the grip on her weapons loosened slightly before she placed her hammer back in its loop. She kept her dagger close to her hip, but did not sheath it as she placed one foot forward, then another. Despite the sense of calm, she remained alert, prepared to respond appropriately should anything prove hostile. When she passed through the threshold, the foliage moved once again behind her, sealing the exit. Before her stood a grand temple, or what remained of one. The stones had fallen to time, some worn smooth by the wind and rain, others having tumbled to the temple floor and allowing the sun to filter through the treetops into the large structure below. Nature had reclaimed the area, thick, creeping vines covering the walls in places, and near the center was a small, lush meadow of sorts. The meadow held bursts of red blooms, and in the middle stood an altar with a grand, untarnished, golden statue of a beautiful woman. Her hair, tinted almost pink, flowed to the altar, and over the edges to disappear into the greenery. Her face looked to the area where Wixenia stood, and the tiefling could see from this distance that she smiled demurely. Come closer, child. Wixenia's brows furrowed deeply as she looked around, her arms crossed, careful to avoid the dagger's sharp edges as she leaned into a hip. There is no one here. Where do you wish me to move, O mysterious one? I am before you. Remove your boots and move forward. I shall tell you why I brought you here. She sighed, closing her eyes before she uncrossed her arms and did as instructed. The greenery beneath her feet seemed to retreat to reveal solid stone, and her gaze lifted to the statue once more. Upon closer inspection, she discovered the statue to hold incredible detail. Something told her the statue's eyes were following her, and she stepped slightly to the side. The statue's head followed her movements. By the guts! Wixenia breathed, taking a step back. The voice chuckled, sending a warm shiver up the woman's spine. As I said, I am before you, Wixenia. You have nothing to fear from me. Who are you? Wixenia was unable to keep the frustration from her voice as she quickly stepped closer, finally sheathing her dagger. The woman's face was unnaturally beautiful, and Wixenia could not say that it was the light of the sun reflecting off its surface that made her want to look away. My name is Sune, and I have called you here because you are important. You, my dear and lovely Wixenia, are who I need to protect what is beautiful in this world. The statue began to shift, the golden sheen losing its luster as it grew larger. The gold turned to pale, supple skin, and the rose gold of her hair softened and deepened in color to match the flowers of the minuscule meadow. She was unabashedly naked, perfectly comfortable to stand before the tiefling in her full glory. You, my child, she began, her voice ringing out through the dilapidated temple, have seen what is coming for this place. Desecration, death, putrid desolation. Sune's voice reached to something deep within Wixenia, her words pulling at the tiefling's heart and bringing tears to her silver eyes. It was like the most beautiful song that no mortal could have the hope of recreating, and yet this beautiful creature sang such a heartbreaking song, and of something Wixenia had never spoken to anyone. It was just a dream, nothing special. Sune's smile broadened as a mother would smile reassuringly at a worried child. It was more than simply a dream. I have been calling to you for quite some time. Wixenia, I know you cherish the world and the beauty it holds. I have watched you bask in the glory of the natural wonders through which you travel. As I too cherish the beauty of the natural world, I would ask something of you. Wixenia took a step back. I have heard tales of such things. A tempting creature appears before an unsuspecting victim and lures them into something terrible. At this, Sune's smile vanished. You would compare me to the fiends and devils who tempt innocents to their doom. Child, I am no fiend. There is no beauty in deception. There is no love in corruption. With this, Sune reached forward and brushed her fingers gently over Wixenia's cheek. I am the embodiment of loveliness in the world. I would see that the world is rid of all that would blemish it and those who would reside upon its surface. Which, again, is why I called you here. I would ask that you champion my mission here, in this corner of existence, and prevent unwholesome souls from tainting what nature had wrought from nothing. The nightmare returned to the tiefling's mind, but in greater detail. She could smell the acrid smoke of the burning forest, could hear the cries of the creature as they perished, could taste the rancid water as it burned her tongue. She fell to her knees, tears welling and spilling over her cheeks. I had thought it was just a nightmare, a recurring thing to haunt my waking hours whenever I was troubled. I am sorry for that which I have burdened you, but I need you, Wixenia. Be the light that this world desperately needs. The corruption has already begun, just a short distance from here. The Lord of Dalhurst is only the beginning, however. There are others who are following in his stead. The goddess knelt with Wixenia and tilted her chin up with cool, soft fingers. I cannot ask this of anyone else, for there is no one here who will understand. It was late in the afternoon when Wixenia had returned to the clearing, slightly dazed and unsteady on her feet. Yindris was seated near one of the fires, plucking the strings of his harp, when he heard her stumble through the brush. His deep blue eyes homed in on her, and he dropped the harp before rushing to her. His smooth voice was rife with concern as he laid his hands gently on her arms. Wix, darling, what's wrong? Are you hurt? Wixenia simply shook her head, taking Yindris's hand and placing it against her forehead between her horns. The half-elf gave a choked sigh. We need to sit you down somewhere. He turned to face the others of the clan. Someone bring me some water and something to eat, please. As one of the younger members ran off toward the food wagon, Yindris led Wixenia to her own wagon and sat her down within the doorway. What happened, my girl? Again she shook her head, still staring into nothingness as she took shallow breaths. Her heart thudded in her chest in a slow, steady, heavy beat. Yindris had to put the stone cup in her hand and lift it to her lips to get her to drink. As the cool water slid down her throat, the trance lifted slowly, and Wixenia finally met Yindris's gaze. What happened? The woman took a breath and watched the way the gentle breeze lifted a few stray locks of Yindris's warm brown hair. I found something, Yin. Someone. Yindris's face grew more concerned. Did they hurt you? No, she didn't. She. A genuine smile pulled across Wixenia's lips, the first she'd felt in ages as she placed her hand reassuringly on her mentor's shoulder. She was beautiful. I've never seen anything like her. I met a goddess, Yin. She called herself Sune. The harp player's hand immediately went to Wixenia's forehead. You're no warmer than usual. Wix, did you eat something you shouldn't have? That's not like you. Wixenia loosed a laugh, bright and cheerful. Not that I'm aware of. She pulled Yindris's hand from her forehead and held it in her hands again. The smile slid from her face, and she stared at the man's palm in hers. I've been given a task. It's important, and I cannot turn from it. If I do, I fear what will happen. What's going on? Benemon's gruff voice called from a short distance away, his usual serious expression painted on his face. Wixenia recognized the look in his brown eyes, though. He was worried, and that he ran his hand through his dusty blonde hair gave that away clearly to her. She's delusional, I think, Ben, Yindris muttered, leaning back to sit on his heels and lay his arms over his thighs. Says Sune talked to her, that she has something to do. Benjamin looked to Wixenia, watching her face carefully as the others of the clan gathered nearby. The dwarf walked closer, rubbing the beard that he kept surprisingly short, and met her gaze with a kind of acceptance. Well, what are you supposed to do? Wixenia looked at Benjamin with relief. I need to go to Dalhurst. That is where she says I am most needed at this moment. Then you'll need provisions and better armour. Dalhurst isn't the friendliest of cities, and you've got a fair journey ahead of you. At this, Yindris stood and crossed his arms as he looked down at the dwarf. Ben, you're not encouraging this, are you? She's old enough to make her own decisions, and who are we to say whether or not a goddess truly spoke to her? Benjamin shrugged before looking up at Yindris. I'm not going to stop her, and neither should you. With only a little more fuss from the half-elf, Wixenia gathered her things and prepared to depart. Not many of the others of the clan gathered to see her off, but her mentors were there beside her as she looked over the camp. Be careful, Yindris said, taking her hand and placing it to her forehead. Benjamin did the same, or placing it to his forehead, sorry. Benjamin did the same, though he let go of her hand quickly after. You'll figure out how to find us if you need to. Wixenia gave the two tight hugs, barely keeping back the tears, before straightening and bid a farewell to her family. She took special care to look at Benjamin and Yindris' face, to ensure that she'd remember them, before she turned to took a breath. This is my duty to them, and I will make sure they stay safe. One foot in front of the other, heart pounding in her chest, she left her known childhood behind, and strode toward the city that would serve as the beginning of her service to the Red Lady.